Welcome to another episode of Gospel and Culture. As always, I'm your host, Justin Bilson. We're here with one of our teaching pastors, Brandon Bernard. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, sir. I love being here with you, man.
Hey, glad you're here. Glad you're here. Hey, our question today is kind of a two-part question, but a really good question, and I think a lot of people want to know. There are so many Bible translations out, especially with YouVersion rather. There are so many Bible translations, but how do I find the right Bible translation for me, for my family, and how do I know which one to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, as time has passed, many translations have surfaced. So I think the options now, are greater in a lot of ways with so many options out there. And I would just say that whatever translation a person chooses, the major goal is that the modern reader needs to understand the meaning of the original text. Okay, that's kind of what we're going after. And the reason we have so many translations is because people are doing that. They're trying to achieve that goal, providing the reader with the original meaning of the text in an understandable language. And so I think what's been helpful for me is you look at a translation breakdown, it feels like a sliding scale. We've talked about this maybe before. But so you have translations that are more formal, and you have translations that are more functional, right? So that really kind of becomes the spectrum that you're looking at when you're thinking about a translation. So more formal, more functional. The more formal is going to be kind of the word for word, all right? And then the more functional is going to be something that we would talk about like thought for thought, all right? And here's what I mean by that. In a word for word approach, translations try to stay as close as possible kind of to the structure and the words of the source language, okay? The original Hebrew and Greek. So sometimes that makes the reading kind of feel a little bit stiff, a little bit difficult to understand. The formal approach, what it risks is sacrificing meaning for the sake of maintaining kind of proper form, okay? And so at the far end of the word for word section, you would have like the King James Version, the American Standard Version, the New King James Version, the New American Standard Version. Those would be ones more word for word. And so sometimes they feel a little bit more difficult to read. As the scale kind of moves from formal to functional, you have translations that kind of seek to express the meaning of the original text in a contemporary language, right? So the aim is to reproduce the meaning of the original text in English, so that the effect on today's reader is kind of the equivalency of the effect on the ancient reader. So sometimes in an effort to elevate the understanding in today's language, the more functional translations, they kind of risk distorting the true meaning of the text, right? So in their effort to kind of make it easy to understand, there can be that risk. So it's wise to know that as you think about choosing a translation, it's really good to think about it word for word, thought for thought, and then you kind of have this scale. So as the scale moves from more formal to more functional, you have the ones that I mentioned earlier. And then you have what we use here at Fellowship is the ESV, the English Standard Version. It really is kind of a combination of a formal, readable version that I really, really like. And then also you can kind of move from the ESV to the Christian Standard Bible, the CSB, which I use as well, kind of in my study and in my home. Sometimes it makes just some little differences that feel a little bit maybe more readable in certain ways. And so those are probably the two that I live in the most. Then you kind of move more thought for thought. The NIV would be around that, thought for thought, and then the New Living Translation. Sometimes with my kids or even with students, I'll encourage the New Living Translation, maybe someone who's new to the faith because it can be really readable. You have the New Century Version, the Contemporary English Version, and then you can also move into a few paraphrases, which some people have heard of, the Living Bible, the Message, and I want to say a little caveat about paraphrase Bibles. They're not actually translations. Okay, so sometimes people say this is a translation, the Message or the Living Bible. Well, they're really not translations. They're paraphrases of someone's interpretation. So technically not a translation from the original languages, but rather an interpretation, explanation, or restatement of the English translation, kind of using different English words. And I wouldn't recommend like paraphrases for like serious study or teaching from. I wouldn't do that because the author of a paraphrase is not really translating the scriptures, but actually they're giving commentary kind of on the scriptures. And by the way, some of it is very, very good, very refreshing, and can kind of bring that needed to light for us to understand a little bit better. But they really are making interpretive decisions for the reader in that. So I personally use the ESV, the CSB, sometimes the New Living Translation. But here's what I'd say. Choose a translation that is readable and understandable for you. Okay, do that. choose a translation that's based on the standard Hebrew and Greek, right? That is important, and you can usually read that in the preface, to find out they're doing that. And I would give preference to something that does translation by committee rather than by an individual. When you're looking at some of those paraphrases, a group of scholars collaborating, really there's a lot of integrity in that. And so those are things I would just say when it comes to choosing a translation, and hopefully you'll choose one and dive into God's Word.
I love that. Thank you so much for answering that question. And it's beautiful to see that no matter whoever is watching, no matter what stage of life or what season of faith that they're in, that we can find a translation that helps us to grow in our faith, no matter what journey or what part we're at in our faith journey. So thanks for that. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, dive in.
Absolutely. Well, hey, this has been another episode of Gospel and Culture. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe at the bottom of the page. You can also follow us on any of our social media platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Please, if you have questions that you want our teaching pastors to answer, send them to us. Send them to gospelinculture@fellowshiponline.com so that we can get those to our teaching pastors to answer for you. Also, when you get these videos, please share them with your family and friends, because we want to reach as many people as we can for God's glory. So thank you for watching Gospel and Culture. We'll see you next time.